How did a hate group that ran an entire country seemingly disappear into thin air? Spoiler alert, they didn't. While World War II has fascinated historians and the public alike since 1945, what happened to the perpetrators of one of the greatest evils of all time is less often discussed. Today on Nutty History, we're examining the hard truth about what happened to the Nazis after World War II. After the Allied victory in World War II, Germany was divided into zones of occupation between the US, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The Allies adopted various policies under the General Plan of Denazification, which was implemented to rid German and Austrian society of Nazi power and influence. Life for detained Nazis varied greatly depending on the zone they lived in. The Soviet internment camps had the poorest conditions, prompting many to attempt to relocate to one of the Western zones under the guise of anti-communist sentiments. Of the Western zones, French-occupied Germany was the most lenient. In their view, Germany as a whole was responsible for the war, and they placed less importance on distinguishing between Nazis and non-Nazis. In the 5 years following the war, about 400,000 Germans were detained in internment camps while awaiting possible penalties. This sounds like a lot, but when considering that up to 45 million Germans at the time were either members or supporters of the Nazi Party, something doesn't add up. The problem with denazification was one of sheer magnitude. There were simply too many Germans involved to process who had done what. Imagine an entire country in line at the DMV. That's the kind of bureaucratic sluggishness we're talking about. Another issue was rebuilding Germany's economy. According to denazification rules, offenders were to be removed from higher-ranking jobs and forced to do manual labor. However, if every Nazi and Nazi sympathizer was held responsible, there wouldn't be enough skilled workers for a functioning society. In the British zone, for instance, it was found that 90% of lawyers were Nazis. Since they couldn't have a functioning society without law or order, Britain determined that 50% of the German legal civil services could be staffed by nominal Nazis. The French zone encountered a similar problem with teachers, having to rehire those they had fired due to Nazi influence to maintain an education system. Reconstructing a country while simultaneously trying to categorize and penalize a large number of culpable citizens was far from a simple process. When denazification began, Eisenhower, an army general at the time, estimated the process would take 50 years. But by 1946, the Allied powers had handed over the reins of denazification to Germany, allowing them to enforce their own punishment. A popular destination for the worst Nazis was South America, which contained many sympathetic dictators at the time who opened their doors. Up to 9,000 Nazi officials and collaborators are thought to have escaped to South America after the war. While Brazil and Chile had their fair share of exiles, Argentina had the most. Juan Perón, the Argentine president, was a fan of fascism, especially after serving as a military attaché in Italy early in World War II. He sought to grow his country's power by recruiting those with particular military and technical expertise. Perón and his government officials created rat lines for Nazi escape through ports in Italy and Spain, aiding in forging documents for leaving the country. Most Nazis made their way down the Pacific using falsified Red Cross passports stamped with Argentine tourist visas. Once in Argentina, many changed their names to go into hiding, but some resumed living under their real names as it became clear that Argentina wouldn't extradite them back to Germany. Of course, Argentina wasn't the only country to poach Nazis for their gain. As an arms race began between the United States and the Soviet Union, collecting expert scientists and engineers became a higher priority than punishing crimes against humanity. In 1945, the US secretly enacted the program Operation Paperclip to bring German scientists and engineers, many of them Nazis, back to the mainland as human weapons. Near the end of the war, Germany had realized the need for these skills, and German scientist Werner Osenberg created a list identifying names. A Polish lab tech found the list torn up in a toilet, which eventually made its way from MI6 to US intelligence. In addition to wanting these people for their side, another crucial motivation of Operation Paperclip was preventing the Soviets from gaining their technical expertise. While called an evacuation operation, identified targets were essentially kidnapped and taken to the US, where they were held for interrogation. Many of these scientists went on to have successful careers in the US and were part of the NASA space program, despite their Nazi involvement. For the most serious offenders who hadn't managed to escape into hiding, the Nuremberg trials prosecuted Nazis in 1946 for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and wars of aggression. These trials were significant for determining international law, especially in prosecuting war crimes. They were also crucial in holding some of the most prominent criminals responsible for the Holocaust. The first and most well-known trial indicted 24 men, with outcomes ranging from acquittal to 10 years imprisonment to death by hanging. In conclusion, while it may seem that the Nazis vanished after World War II, the truth is far more complex. Many found refuge in sympathetic countries like Argentina, others were absorbed into the post-war efforts of superpowers like the United States and the Soviet Union, and only a fraction faced justice at the Nuremberg trials. The legacy of their crimes and the world's efforts to deal with the aftermath continues to be a subject of significant historical interest and moral reflection. The Nuremberg trials, which prosecuted key Nazi figures, sentenced 12 men to death. While these trials represented justice for some, the capital punishment of 12 men pales in comparison to the millions who died in the Holocaust and the large number of perpetrators who were never held accountable for their actions. Some critics have labeled the Nuremberg trials as examples of victors' justice and judicially invalid. Others point to the hypocrisy of the Allied nations prosecuting crimes against humanity while they themselves committed various wartime actions. After the Allied powers gave up their denazification efforts within a few months, Germany was left with the task, despite still being occupied by Allied countries. Unsurprisingly, Germany adopted a looser set of rules for identifying and punishing Nazis. Anyone born after 1919 was considered brainwashed and exempt from punishment. Of the public officials removed from office by the US, 75% were reinstated. To avoid the lengthy and arduous process of trials, 90% of Nazis were classified as lesser offenders. By 1948, the Cold War had become a greater concern for the US, and remaining cases were expedited with legally questionable proceedings. By 1951, denazification ended, and the focus shifted to paying reparations to victims and their families. From pardons and amnesties enacted by the German government, nearly 800,000 people were freed from any punishment or penalty. So, was Germany finally denazified? At the German Ministry of Justice at the time, 77% of senior officials were former Nazis. Post-war, some of the most notorious Nazis managed to go into hiding and later escape Germany. While some lived entire lives getting away with mass murder, others were captured by Nazi hunters who emerged to deliver justice to war criminals living anonymously. Adolf Eichmann, the mastermind behind Hitler's Final Solution and network of concentration camps, fled to Buenos Aires where he worked in a Mercedes-Benz plant and lived with his wife and 4 children. In 1960, Eichmann was captured by Israeli agents, drugged, and flown out of Argentina disguised as an Israeli airline worker who had suffered head trauma. Despite protests from Argentina for his return, Eichmann was tried and executed in Israel. Not all Nazi hunters were government operatives. Simon Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor turned Nazi hunter, tracked down Franz Stangl in São Paulo. Stangl was responsible for the Action Tier for euthanasia program that killed those with mental and physical disabilities. After Wiesenthal discovered him, Stangl was extradited to West Germany and sentenced to life imprisonment. As late as 2019 in the United States, Jacques Palage was deported at 95 years old. A historian at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum discovered that Palage had served as a guard at a forced labor camp during the war, contrary to his claim of working on his father's farm in 1949. It's an unfortunate truth that not all Nazis were held accountable for their crimes. Nazi hunting has since declined as most people alive during World War II have passed away. That's all for this episode of Nutty History. If you learned something new, please like this video and let us know in the comments what historical time or event you'd like us to cover next time.